It was August 6, 1945. A quiet morning in Hiroshima. Children walking to school, trains running on time. And then, in an instant, the sky became white. A single flash brighter than the sun appeared, followed by a silence so deep that time itself seemed to stop. Within seconds, a city of 300,000 people was erased from the map. 3 days later, Nagasaki would face the same fate. 2 bombs, 2 flashes, and the birth of a new age, the nuclear age. What actually happens when a city is struck by an atomic bomb? Not just in theory, but in brutal, physical reality. Today, we'll break it down into 6 devastating effects, each one drawn from the eyewitness accounts and scientific studies that followed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. From the blinding light to the silent poison that lingered for generations, these are the 6 effects of being hit by a nuclear bomb. The light. At 8:15 a.m., Hiroshima's sky exploded into light. Witnesses described a blue-white fireball brighter than anything they had ever seen. For less than 1/10 of a second, the temperature at the center of the explosion reached over 40 million degrees Celsius, hotter than the surface of the sun. The first wave of energy released was pure radiation and light. Everything exposed to it was instantly bleached or burned. Wood turned to charcoal, skin ignited. And on walls, bridges, and pavements, human forms were burned into the surface. Black silhouettes of people who had stood there a moment before, now transformed into shadows of ash. In that first instant, retinas were destroyed, skin vaporized, and air itself became a weapon. The light didn't just illuminate, it carved life out of existence. One survivor remembered seeing everything white, as if the world had become a sheet of paper. For a fraction of a second, Hiroshima ceased to be a city and became a photograph, burned into reality by the brightest light in human history. Even miles away, people suffered retinal burns from looking toward the sky. Some who were indoors described a glow through the walls, followed by the feeling that the sun had entered the room. The light was over almost instantly, but what it revealed and destroyed would burn in memory forever. The heat. Right after the flash came the heat, a wave of thermal energy powerful enough to ignite the very air around it. In Hiroshima, within seconds, entire blocks of wooden houses caught fire. The temperature near the center of the explosion reached thousands of degrees Celsius, enough to melt metal and turn glass into liquid. Fires spread rapidly through streets and rooftops, merging into what scientists later called a firestorm, a phenomenon where rising heat pulls in surrounding air, creating hurricane-like winds that feed the flames. The same sequence unfolded in Nagasaki 3 days later. Neighborhoods disappeared under thick columns of smoke as fires joined into a single, immense blaze. The air shimmered with heat, and visibility dropped to almost nothing. For hours, both cities burned continuously. And yet, amid that destruction, something remarkable emerged: the resilience of those who survived. Rescue efforts began almost immediately, even with few resources and no communication. The fire, though devastating, would later become a powerful reminder of how fragile and how enduring human civilization can be in the face of overwhelming force. The shockwave. After the flash and the fire came the force, a pressure wave moving faster than sound. In Hiroshima, the shockwave leveled almost everything within a 2-mile radius. Concrete walls crumbled, steel frames twisted, and buildings simply disappeared. People were thrown through the air like leaves. Those standing close to windows were shredded by glass moving at hundreds of miles per hour. The blast wave doesn't just hit once, it moves out then rushes back, a double impact that crushes, then sucks. The sudden pressure change ruptures eardrums, lungs, and blood vessels. Many who survived the first wave suffocated when the air was pulled back toward the explosion's center. The sound itself was indescribable. Survivors said it was not like thunder or artillery. It was as if the entire atmosphere had broken. In Nagasaki, the topography of the hills concentrated the blast, turning valleys into channels of destruction. Entire districts vanished beneath collapsing hillsides. At the center of both explosions, air pressure exceeded 35 tons per square meter. For comparison, that's more than the pressure at the bottom of the ocean. Nothing built by human hands could withstand it. The wave flattened churches, hospitals, and schools, sparing no one. And when it passed, silence followed, until the fires began again. The radiation. What makes the atomic bomb unlike any other weapon isn't just its power, it's what comes after. Even as Hiroshima burned, something invisible was spreading through the ruins: radiation. Gamma rays and neutrons, invisible particles of energy, raced outward, passing through walls, skin, and bone. Those who survived the initial blast began to feel it within minutes: dizziness, vomiting, and burning sensations beneath the skin. Within hours, their white blood cells began to die. Fever followed. Hair fell out. Gums bled. Their bodies, still alive, were being dismantled from the inside. Doctors didn't understand what they were seeing. Some believed it was a new kind of disease. Only later did they realize the bomb's invisible energy had rewritten the survivors' cells. Days later, radiation sickness claimed thousands who had seemed uninjured. Weeks later, more died from infections and internal bleeding. Years later, cancers and genetic mutations appeared among the survivors and their children. In Nagasaki, the damage was the same, but so was the courage. Doctors and nurses, themselves dying from exposure, continued to treat others. They had no medicine for radiation, only compassion. Even today, traces of plutonium and uranium from those bombs remain in the soil. Radiation is the ghost of the atomic age, silent, odorless, and immortal. The poison. When the firestorm ended, Hiroshima was a desert of ash, but the danger wasn't over. It had only changed form. The explosion had lifted tons of radioactive dust high into the atmosphere, creating the infamous mushroom cloud. As it cooled, this dust began to fall back to Earth, a deadly rain of black, oily ash known as black rain. Survivors reported the sky turning dark within an hour. Raindrops the size of coins fell from the sky, staining clothes and skin. People who drank the water or stood in the rain later died from radiation poisoning. This fallout contaminated rivers, crops, and soil for years. Fish died in the rivers. Trees grew twisted and leafless. In the weeks after the bombing, people who returned to the ruins developed sores and tumors just from walking through the dust. In Nagasaki, radioactive particles were carried into the ocean and then back onto shore by tides. Even decades later, certain areas around the epicenters showed traces of contamination. The Earth itself had absorbed the bomb. The land became memory, a reminder that the environment, too, can die. Scientists later estimated that up to 80% of Hiroshima's radiation came not from the blast itself, but from the fallout that followed. It was the final insult of the bomb, to poison not only the living, but the very soil that sustained them. Consequences. When the dust settled, Hiroshima and Nagasaki were no longer just cities. They had become symbols. What remained after the explosions was not only destruction, but a profound human story about loss, resilience, and renewal. The survivors, known as hibakusha, faced lasting health effects and difficult memories, but they also became powerful voices for peace. Through their stories, the world learned not only about the power of the atomic bomb, but about the strength of the human spirit to endure and to hope. Today, Hiroshima and Nagasaki are vibrant cities once more. Parks, museums, and memorials stand where destruction once fell, serving as reminders not of fear, but of responsibility. They teach that technology and progress must always be guided by humanity and compassion. The true legacy of those events is not devastation, but determination, a global movement to ensure that such a tragedy never happens again. That was today's video. If you liked it, leave a like on the video. Consider subscribing and use the comments for a next topic.